Hi there, welcome to Fresh Feast with Dr. Paul. I'm your host, Dr. Paul Newton, and today we're going to be making Instant Pot marinara sauce. The ingredients that we'll be using are some San Marzano tomatoes. I like to use a really big can of tomatoes because it is about the equivalent of 4 of these cans. And I get these tomatoes at Costco. I like this brand because it's really thick and the sauce ends up nice and rich and you don't have to add any tomato paste. We'll be adding olive oil. We'll be using that to cook up the onions and the garlic. Then when we mix in the tomatoes, we'll add some salt and some fresh basil to really add a really nice element of flavor. So let's get right to work. I'm just gonna clear up some space here. Now, for the big can of tomatoes, I would use probably 3 of these onions. They're medium, or no, these are large onions, so we'll use 2 of them. And what I have here are 3 medium-sized onions. You need about 8 cloves of garlic. So I'll just get a nice one out. And let's get things going. Cut your garlic. I like to get everything prepped ahead of time. And that way it goes together really quickly. Using the Instant Pot is really nice because a marinara sauce typically takes about 2.5 hours. Now you can do it on the stovetop and simmer it low and slow for a couple of hours, but in the Instant Pot, you're looking at approximately 10 to 12 minutes, which is very convenient. This marinara sauce I learned how to make when I was in Toronto at Chiropractic College. And the apartment that I had on Mount Pleasant Avenue was right above this restaurant called Allo Bistro. It's not there anymore, unfortunately. But I had an Italian family there that basically adopted me into the kitchen, and I would come home from school and I would go to the kitchen in the restaurant rather than going up to my apartment. And I got lots of meals, and what was really great is that I got to see the goings-on in a kitchen, in a restaurant kitchen, and I actually got to participate, which was really fun. So this was the tomato sauce that they would make every day and use in most of their recipes. So it's a really versatile tomato sauce. I use it on my pizzas, pastas, and sometimes I'll cook chicken or other meats in it. So I always like to have some on hand. I keep it in the freezer, and it's a real staple around here. So you're looking at about 2 large onions, get them all chopped ahead of time. Let's get this one too. Alright, so we got our onions ready. Let's get some basil ready. I tried growing some basil in the garden. It's not doing so well, so I had to go out and buy some. But it is really nice to have fresh basil on hand all the time. For this recipe, I would use about half this packet. Maybe it's about a cup, so I'm just gonna wash it. Just throw it into my salad spinner and rinse it and make sure no dirt's coming off of it. it's clean, I know I don't need to rinse it more. So, give it a little spin dry. Basil's ready. We'll just use the leaves. And I'll get the can open. A friend of mine told me I was using my can opener wrong and told me to put it on, instead of doing this, which I found really hard, put it on the top. And I said, I've seen can openers for that. She said, no, this is how they're supposed to be used. So it actually works. It's a big can. There we go. All right, so that's ready. So we've got everything all set. Let's get the Instant Pot over here. I got a really big one because I don't make anything small. I always like leftovers. So I have the 8-liter Instant Pot. You can get smaller ones. You can get a 6-liter, and I think there's an even smaller size. But I had been hearing people talking about how great they were, and I thought, oh, what's the big deal? But once I got one, I cannot live without it. So I'm gonna set it to saute. The saute setting here. Lids on. Okay, and it's going to start up. Olive oil. So let's add 4 tablespoons of olive oil. Now, sometimes I just measure it right into my wooden spoon. It's really a guesstimate, but I know people like recipes when they want to recreate things. We'll let that heat for a little bit, and then we're going to fry up the onions. Let's just pull off the basil leaves while we wait. Here we go. Let's get the onions in here. They should start sizzling pretty soon. And we'll put the garlic in after so it doesn't burn, once the onions get a little bit translucent. Sorry, it's so deep you can't see in my pot here. There we go. So I cut up 1 clove. I've got 8 cloves of garlic right here, and I'll add that as soon as this starts to cook. Just gonna grab a ladle. There we go. The big can of tomatoes is hard to pour into the pot. Here we go, there's that sizzle. You end up with some awful splashed messes everywhere. you want to cook the onions for about 2 or 3 minutes. The beauty with the Instant Pot is once you set it to a temperature and you get it to pressure, you can walk away and leave it, and it takes care of everything. You don't have to pay attention to what's going on in the pot, and you can get to other tasks you have to do in the kitchen. And unlike a stovetop pressure cooker, you've got to watch it and be careful that you're not burning things. So it's a really useful tool, and I make a lot of recipes that I used to do on the stove in a regular pot in this pot. Now we'll add the garlic, 8 cloves, cook that for another minute. Make sure I remember to add the salt. I'll also make sure that the recipe that I include with this has the proportions for using 1 can, a small can of tomatoes, so you can actually just scale down if you're making a smaller amount. But like I said, you want to have a lot of this sauce on hand, and it freezes really nicely. So the onions are translucent. You can smell that garlic. Really nice and fragrant. Let's add some tomatoes. Like I said, this can be a little messy. And the tomatoes are already in a sauce, so it's not water like most cans that you get at the grocery store. And you don't end up with this really watery kind of sauce that you have to simmer down or thicken up with a can of tomato paste or two. And the flavor is so nice. You can see that the color is really bright red. Now we should be safe to pour this in. Still getting a little bit of splashing. There we go. So now we can turn the sauté off. I'm going to add the salt. This is a gray salt. I got it at Costco. I really like this salt because it has a nice flavor. It's not as salty as table salt. And the good thing about it is it's natural sea salt, it's unrefined, and that's why it's gray, and it's kind of a little bit wet. It comes in a sealed container and it stays pretty damp. So we're going to add 2 teaspoons of this gray salt. Mix that in. And throw in your garlic or your basil. Put the lid on, lock it. There's a valve on top. You want to make sure it's at sealed. That allows the pressure to build up. And I'll set the time on manual for 11 minutes. And we can move on to some other task while we're cooking. And this is getting to pressure right now. The Instant Pot has been doing its thing for 11 minutes and it's ready to open. I just released the pressure. There's no steam blowing up. You have to be careful that you don't get in the way of the valve. So let's open her up, see what we've got. Still some pressure and a lot of heat in there. And now we want to either puree or mash the tomatoes. It just depends on the consistency you like. Now, when I was living in Toronto above that restaurant, they just mashed it. And it was a nice thick and chunky sauce. But if you want to use an immersion blender, you can get a puree that makes it a lot smoother. It's just a matter of personal preference. And today I'm just mashing it. And there we go. I like to put the sauce into these containers to put in the freezer. I usually let it cool a little bit more, but I wanted you to see it. So what you see is we've got a nice, rich and chunky sauce here. Smells really good. The basil is so fragrant. And I get about 3 of these containers out of the big can of tomatoes. So it's ready to use right away. And it freezes so well, it's nice to pop out of the freezer and have on hand for pizza night, or when you're making some pasta. I have incorporated it into seafood dishes, so it's very versatile and awesome to have in your freezer ready to go. You've been watching Fresh Feast with Dr. Paul. I hope you enjoy this marinara sauce as much as I do. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your comments below. I'll see you next time.